God is dead, and we killed him. Nietzsche does not shout it as one celebrates a victory. He writes these words as a crime denounced, a silent collapse that had been dragging on to centuries. When the philosopher pronounces this phrase in the Gaia Science and repeats it in this one, Spoke Zarathustra, he is not just talking about religion, it is talking about the invisible basis that supported an entire civilization, moral values, the meaning of existence, the idea of truth, the comfort in the face of suffering. With modernity, the advancement of science, the emergence of critical thinking and cultural fragmentation, this base began to crumble. God, for Nietzsche, was the ultimate symbol of an ordained, predictable, safe world. His death represents the end of absolute certainty, the disappearance of a last reference, the demolition of a foundation on which we live for millennia. But the problem is not just the absence of God. That's what comes next. Nietzsche writes, "What did we do when we let out the earth of your Son? Where does it move now? Where do we move? God's death is not the end, it is the beginning of the abyss, an abyss that opens within culture, philosophy, and soul. And what is left now? A question echoing in the void. If God is dead, who will support the world now?" God's death was not just the disappearance of a belief, it was the collapse of a millennial foundation. For centuries, God's idea worked as a kind of existential compass. She told us who we are, where we came from, where we are going. She gave meaning to suffering, morality, love, time. Without God, all these certainties began to tremble. Nietzsche realized this with brutal clarity. He understood that the absence of a transcendent sense does not only generate freedom, it also generates vertigo, because suddenly everything seems possible, but nothing more seems necessary. If there is no more absolute purpose, if there is no more supreme good, if life is no longer a mission given by something superior, what is left? Nothing left nihilism. And Nietzsche was one of the first to face nihilism head-on, without disguise, without vain hope, no comforting promises. He called it the most disturbing of all guests, a guest who invades the modern and whisper soul, "There is no more sense, everything is vain, everything is device." This post-God void spreads everywhere, in art that does not thrill, in the policy that manipulates, in the work that tires, in relationships that do not touch, in life that passes without leaving mark. Nietzsche saw modernity as a time to drift, with advanced technology but bankrupt spirituality, with excessive information but a shortage of meaning. And in this collapse, each individual is left alone. Yes, but disoriented, as someone who wakes up in the middle of the ocean without compass and landless in sight. This is the challenge. Not just realize the death of God, but deal with the world that stood after it fell. With the death of God, Nietzsche points to the inevitable arrival of nihilism. But what is this nihilism anyway? Nihilism is not just hopelessness, it is the deep emptying of the value. This is when all the structures that sustained our lives lose the brightness, the weight, the strength. That's when things keep happening, but they don't seem to make sense. Nietzsche distinguishes two types of nihilism, passive nihilism and active nihilism. The first is the silent collapse. It is the disguise, withdrawal. It is the one who keeps living but by inertia, works, studies, consumes, has fun, but inside it is empty. It is the boredom that erodes, the apathy that anesthesia, that lost look that says, so much. It is the young man who feels that everything has already been said. It is the adult who follows the routine, but feels that something essential is missing. It is the culture of repetition, excess, exhaustion. Already active nihilism is the opposite of this. It is the one who faces the abyss and decides to create. Nietzsche believed that before the death of God, there are two choices left. Or you surrender to nothingness, or you become a creator of meaning. This is the tragic challenge of modernity. Without an absolute truth below, each of us needs to assume the weight of inventing its own truth. And that scares, because it requires radical responsibility, requires strength of mind, It requires maturity to live without guarantees. Nihilism, then, is not just a philosophical diagnosis. It is a daily experience. It is in the emptiness we feel after an achievement, in the crisis that arrives without warning, in the deep solitude of those who live in the automatic. Nietzsche does not romanticize this state, but it doesn't escape from him either. He plunges into nihilism to cross it, and it is in this dive that he begins to build his philosophy of future. Nietzsche predicted a symbolic figure that, according to him, would emerge in the vacuum left by the death of God, the last man. Who is this last man? It is the one who escapes the anguish of freedom, who doesn't want to create new values, wants comfort, that does not want true, wants distraction, that does not want depth, wants stability. The last man lives a warm existence. Avoid risks, prevents pain, avoid effort. He no longer believes in great ideals, do not believe in yourself, but it doesn't suffer either, because he anesthetized his own spirit. He says, before comfort than greatness, before security than freedom, rather entertainment than truth. Nietzsche describes this kind as someone who blinks. It is a human being reduced to consumption, passivity, voluntary mediocrity. It's someone who changed the sublime for the pleasant, the abyss for stability. It is the society that mocks dreamers, that discards the philosophers, that transforms life into a sequence of distractions. The last man does not kill anyone, but it doesn't save either. He lives, but without soul. And why Nietzsche cares about him? Because it represents the future of humanity, if nothing changes. It is the portrait of what we can become when we are no longer great, when we give up being free for fear of falling, when we exchange the creative anguish for the comfort zone. The last man is among us, maybe in us, and recognizing it is the first step, not to become him. For Nietzsche, the collapse of all traditional values should not lead us to resignation, but to reinvention. And it is at this point that he presents his most powerful and controversial idea, the Übermensch, the Superman. Superman is not a superhuman being in the physical sense. It is not a comic book hero. It is someone who transcended the old values and had the courage to create their own. It is the one who looks at the world without religious crutches, without inherited morals, no dogmas, and yet he finds reason to live. Nietzsche says, man is something that must be overcome, because for him, the ordinary human being is still an unfinished project, arrested to resentment, guilt, denial of life. Superman, on the contrary, states life, with all your pain, contradictions, losses, and helplessness. He does not flee from existence, he hugs her with fury and love. It is someone who lives without approval. That does not expect future redemption, which finds meaning in the very act of creating meaning. This figure symbolizes an ideal of radical maturity, not perfection, but depth. No holiness, but wholeness. The Superman is the one who crossed nihilism and came back with a new worldview. He does not regret the absence of God. It turns it into space for freedom, for creation, to become who you are. But Nietzsche knew this is not a task for everyone. It is a lonely path, requires inner strength. It requires falling and raising many times, and above all, it requires the courage not to anesthetize before the abyss. The Superman is not a destination. It is a tension, a continuous struggle not to surrender to mediocrity, even when everything around asks for conformity. Without God, without absolute morals, no guaranteed truths. What do we have? Nietzsche responds with a central idea of his philosophy, the will of power. But what is it? It is not the seat of power in the political sense. It is not domination over others. It is something deeper, more intimate. It is the creative force that inhabits every living being. It is the impulse of growing, of transforming, asserting itself in the face of chaos. The desire for power is the opposite of resignation. It is the scream that says, even if the world is not meaningful, I will make sense to it. It is this force that drives the artist to create, the thinker to question, the individual turning pain into beauty. Nietzsche believed that human greatness is not in accepting orders, but in creating values, not to be reduced the victim, not to blame the world or the past, but assume the responsibility of sculpting one's own destination. That is why he despised the resentment. The resentful does not create, he accuses. The resentful cling to the moral of weakness, hopes that the other would fail, lives trapped in the past, hoping the world will be fair. But the man of the will of power does not expect. He acts. He builds a yes to life, even when everything around seems to say no. This will is what differentiates those who only survive who really lives. This is what separates the last man from Superman. It is what makes possible an existence that is not limited to repetition, but it dare to create the new one. And here is the most challenging point. The desire for power is not comfortable. She does not promise security. It requires confrontation, requires effort, requires courage. But it is only through her that we can make life not a burden to be carried, but a work to be created. Nietzsche knew that without God, without eternal commandments, without an absolute good from outside, life could dive into a huge empty. But he also believed that this abyss was an invitation, a challenge for the strong, to the brave, for those willing to reinvent themselves. This is where the most controversial and perhaps the most misunderstood concept of all its philosophy is born, the Übermensch, the Superman. This is not a superior being in the biological sense or a comic book hero. Nietzsche was not talking about physical strength, but of spiritual strength. The Superman is the one who surpasses the present man, one who doesn't need given truths, neither heavenly rewards to do good. He creates his own morals, their own values. He does not need the approval of society, nor bends to the moral of the flock. But that has a price. He is lonely, deeply lonely, because being free, real, is also being excluded. It is walking where no one walks, think what no one thinks, and feel what no one has the courage to feel. Nietzsche said most people do not want freedom, want security. It wants a predictable world with clear rules and eternal promises. But Superman wants the risk, wants chaos, wants the weight of the responsibility to exist without excuses. He lives as if life is a work of art. Because you know there is no ready script, only his own hand shaking, brave, human, sculpting the meaning. This man does not deny the pain. He crosses her, and in it finds strength. He does not escape the anguish. He turns her into wisdom. He does not seek to be saved. He seeks to be whole. Nietzsche didn't believe this man already existed. For him, it was a promise, a horizon, a goal, but a goal that can only be achieved when we cease to be slaves of inherited beliefs, of expectations of others, and we assume the role of authors of our own existence. Deep down, the Superman is not someone above others. It's someone above yourself, above all that one day it limited him, and maybe, in moments of silence, when you dare to be sincere with your own soul, you feel this call too. Nietzsche led us here, withdrew the floor, pointed the empty sky, powered the veils of morals, religion, certainty. And now, what is left? It is at this point that many feel the cold in the spine, because total freedom, without dogmas, meaningless, without heaven waiting, it is not light. It weighs. It is as if Nietzsche put us in front of a broken mirror, frameless, and say, now create you the image you will reflect. But how to create without going crazy? How to live without getting lost? Nietzsche invites us to what he calls eternal return, the most radical idea of responsibility. The hypothesis that everything you live in, each gesture, every choice, every pain and every joy, will repeat itself infinitely, exactly the same way. And the question he asks is, would you accept to live your life again just as it was, forever? If not, something needs to change. This is the criterion. This is the ruler. Live so that you would want to relive not only supports, but embrace every moment without regret, shameless, with the courage of those who affirm their own existence, even with all its imperfections. Nietzsche does not offer comfort. It offers fire, the fire of creation, the warmth of a life that is built, not inherited. This is the true revolution. Assume freedom not as a gift, but as a burden that forces us to grow. You are no longer tied to dogmas, but now you need to decide what is worth living. And this is the question that resonates like thunder. What in your life is worthy of eternal return? Nietzsche does not want followers, want creators. You want you to release yourself, not only from God, but from the idea that someone will tell you how to live. Because in the end, it is not about the death of God. It is about the birth of a human being capable of becoming what it is. Nietzsche did not come to offer comfort. He came to fire, take the crutches, topple the walls, and put you before yourself, naked, fragile, and completely free. God's death for him was not an end. It was the beginning of something much more demanding. The birth of the human who creates values that does not repeat, that does not live by reflection, but by decision. And that decision, it's yours. There is no manual. It has no guaranteed salvation. There is no one watching you from above. Only you, your conscience, and the world, waiting for what you are going to do with it. Maybe that's why Nietzsche was so misunderstood, because it is easier to hate those who point the abyss than to face what he reveals. But if you got here, it's because part of you want to know, want to understand, want to grow. It wants to become who it is, even if it requires crossing the desert. And in the end, this may be Nietzsche's biggest provocation. Do not accept a ready world, but build a possible world. Do not live in fear of the absence of meaning, but to live so that life itself becomes a cry of affirmation. If this video confronted you, shook you, or brought you clarity, share with those who also need this reflection. Leave here in the comments. You feel that you are creating your own way, or are you stuck in the ways you have given you? Like the video, subscribe to the channel. We see each other in the next episode. Until then, live not like who repeats, but as the world restarts.